are bringing you everything they have for this draft. Some of them have been here before, some are experiencing this for the first time, but all have the same goal in mind to play the beautiful game at the professional level. So, who will get their dream started tonight? Nick McVicar here, and I will be your host for tonight's CPL USports Draft show right here on Garage Door Sports. Joining me tonight, we have an incredible team. First up, if you follow the CPL and U Sports in any capacity, then you have definitely read his words somewhere. Managing editor of 49 Sports, as well as contributor for CBC, the Kingston Frontenacs, Alpine Canada, and one of the voices of the U Sports Men's Soccer Championship, Ben Steiner. Ben, man, how are you doing today?
To this show, and you've brought in a pretty talented crew as well. So 164 players available to draft today, and there's definitely going to be 16 good ones, but you brought three good commentators into this show.
Oh, it's going to be a lot of fun. And we do, as you mentioned, we have a really good group. And next up, a former Carleton Raven player turned Algonquin women's assistant coach and one of the other voices of the U Sports Men's Soccer Championship this past even. Steve Ball joins us. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Really a pleasure to be here. First time doing something like this, a draft, and it's great to be with Ben and Julian as well. So thanks for having me.
Oh, and you already mentioned the last man up. It's last but not least, I should say, nicknamed the Water Boy by Toronto FC players, former Carleton Raven and editor-in-chief on postcoach.ca, Julian Carr. Julian, how's it going?
Great to be here, Nick. Great to be on this panel. I'm fantastic, and I'm looking forward to this.
That's what I like to hear. And man, you mentioned it, a panel that is incredible. Three great guys, lots of knowledge on the U Sports and the CPL season. And let's start with where we are coming from before we get to where we are going, guys. Ben, I want to start with you. This CPL season saw for the first time a new champion since the very first season in Pacific FC. And their team has basically gone from champion to what are they going to be in this offseason already, with a lot of players moving on, a couple moving to rival Forge. What did you make of the 2022 season, and more specifically Pacific FC in general? Oh, I think you're muted there, Ben.
I certainly was. Apologies for that. It's going to be an interesting season for Pacific because even in just this short time since the CPL final, they've lost a lot of integral players to their team. And Taryn Campbell has been with their team since the first season, leading that front line, was integral in their win over the Whitecaps in the Canadian Championship. And he's not there. He's moved on to Forge. And so has Alessandro Hajabrapur, who scored the winning goal against Forge. So he'll have a fun time walking into that locker room in Hamilton. So it's a little bit tough for Pacific to sort of find their identity and a path forward. But I do think that there is a way that they can find a path forward through today's draft. I think one of the strikers that's available is Ian Wibley, and he works well in a two-man system. And there's some potential that Isaac Coach from the University of Victoria also makes his way to Pacific as well. So there's a lot of options and a lot of ways that Pacific can go. But the bright spot they have is Pa Moduka, and he's a smart coach. He's a young coach and an innovative one who doesn't necessarily have a style that he's fixed to like an older coach. So he'll be able to adjust. And I'm confident that Pacific will still be strong because they have a good organizational structure and a coach who can adjust to new players and new situations.
That's a great point. You mentioned Pamadou Ka, and coaching is going to be a big conversation in this draft in general because we have a new coach at York United and a team that doesn't have a coach in Atletico Ottawa. Julian, what do you make of those two teams trying to transition from where they were last year with their coaches in Jimmy Brennan and Mista to Martin Nash in York and Atletico Ottawa, who we still don't know who's going to be the coach?
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. Well, it's interesting because in Atletico, it's a question of how are they choosing their team, and then they're going to bring somebody in to actually more or less manage the team that they've chosen. And without having a coach who's got a definitive style, you have to find a coach that will be able to mold your players into what you want them to do. With Martin Nash is starting off from the hop. He's got great experience coming from the likes of Calgary, and he has a solid coaching staff. Now, he did lose one of his pieces in his former teammate in Paul Stalteri to TFC, and which is really, in my opinion, is a natural transition. Anytime a big club comes to you from a smaller club and says, yeah, we want you to come with us, you go, unless you're really comfortable or you own the team. Paul was comfortable, but Paul doesn't own the team. So I get it why he would go to TFC. So Martin's got an opportunity here to put his stamp on the team. He's going to have a young core. He's going to have a lot of players that are full of piss and vinegar because they're going to be young. They're going to want to prove themselves. And he's got a good core that he can build around. So it's just getting them to fall into his style. The wild card, though, like I said, is Atletico, because without knowing who the philosophy is, who's setting up the philosophy, what kind of culture they're going to have, like we see it didn't work too well with Mista last year. So now the next question is, what are we expecting? I think that it might end up being a coach eventually out of Atletico's system, but and then they'll bring in two coaches who understand the CPL to go from there.
I mean, it makes sense. Like, it's a team that has such a good backing with the parent club of Atletico Madrid. So if they bring somebody in, it would make sense. But does that make sense for a Canadian team? Like, our country is very, very vast with our soccer knowledge because we have so many different backgrounds. Would bringing somebody in to try to coach within that system make sense? And I'm not really sure. Steve, maybe I can throw it to your expertise here. Do you think that would be a good move for Ottawa?
Yeah, Julian and I have discussed a little bit of this before the show as well, and it's a tough call. You're right. I think the country's so big, and there's sort of pockets of culture. I think a lot of us would agree with that, right? So, but I think having a hybrid, as Julian said, maybe having assistants that knew the league and knew the university system as well, might benefit a coach coming from the outside. It's a total mystery. I mean, I don't know, Ben, if you've heard anything about Ottawa, but it seems pretty much up in the air. I live in Ottawa, and there really hasn't been much buzz about it in terms of there's been a lot of speculation, but nothing really definitive about what's going to happen in Ottawa. So, I mean, the draft will be interesting. It's another one too. Without having a coach, you're going to be like Julian said. There's going to be players that the coach hasn't drafted, right? So it's an interesting situation for Ottawa.
Yeah, and Ben, do you want to jump on that since you posed it? You're muted again, bud.
Apologies. I'll just stay unmuted. But the Ottawa situation is an interesting one because they do hold the first overall pick. And a lot of the time with the first pick, outside of Gabe Bitar in the first year, you're finding somebody who can contribute to your team right off the bat. And for Atletico Ottawa, that is a strength that they probably need and a player that they need to contribute this coming season. That's why I see them going with a goalkeeper. I had in my mock draft Sviatoslav Artemenko out of Guelph University going to Atletico Ottawa. They don't have a goalkeeper on their roster. And that's one that is not entirely hard to just plug in because there's really only one system of playing a goalkeeper, and that's stopping shots and keeping the ball out of the net. So in terms of drafting a goalkeeper, that might be the smartest way to go because you're not pushing yourself towards one system.
And you mentioned your mock draft, so why don't we throw that up there? You can kind of run us through your first round. You have Artemenko going number 1 and then Al Gandor going number 2. Do you want to run us through the rest of it?
Yeah, so I've got Mo Al Gandour from Mount Royal going to FC Edmonton in the second pick. Just familiar with the Western Canadian scene. One of the best goal scorers in U Sports, really. Quentin Pommier going to HFX. He's from the University of Montreal, and HFX, or I guess Halifax now, they've dropped the HFX, is quite dedicated to the University of Montreal program. They've had guys like Kareem Sow come in and go back to UDM as well. So I see Pommier, a nice playmaker, holds up the ball very well. He'll go there. Rafael Garcia, he'll go back to Valor. Didn't quite fit in with them through 16 games in the inaugural season, but he'll find his way back after a year at Carleton. Gabe Bitar, not getting drafted by Calvary this time. It would be his third time drafted into the CPL. I have him going to York United. And that's really just because York United is a young team. They don't really have a target striker, and that's what Gabe Bitar is. And he has that Calvary connection that drafted him twice with Martin Nash, now the head coach. That leaves Calvary in a fantastic position because they will get one of the best goal scorers in this draft in Cairo Coor, who completely lit up the AUS this season with Cape Breton. And then Hamilton is going to keep fairly local with Soji Olatoy from York University and has a bit of a connection with Sigma and Hamilton. And then Pacific staying very local and drafting their first out of the University of Victoria in striker Ian Whibley.
I love it. And that's what I agree with a lot of those stuff, but I also can see so many different ways that this can go. Quickly, before we cut to a quick break, before we start the draft at 8 o'clock, Julian, any surprises on that mock draft? Anyone that you think might end up going higher, or anyone that you think will jump into that top 8?
It's hard to say, because the problem is that the big thing that everybody in this league needs is scoring. So if you can score, then that's a wild card. Like case in point, we talked about Ottawa. Ottawa needs everything, but Ottawa also needed somebody who could put the ball in the back of the net, because they were at times, for a better way of putting it, they were inept at putting the ball in the back of the net. A lot of times in their attack, they had no target man. Now, it all depends. If you can score in this game, you write your own ticket. And the other thing too is center backs. Everybody wants to be a scorer. Everybody wants to be an attacking midfielder growing up. Everybody wants to be Messi, Ronaldo. Nobody wants to be the guy at the back who's the plug.
It's true. Steve, you got about a minute here. Anything you want to add before we go to break?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Kwesi Loney a little bit, who's a good friend of mine, and we were chatting a bit about Dario Conte as well. Again, I think size is important too, and I think some of these players that we see at the university level who are really, really good players sometimes get overlooked because of size, which is understandable. I know the professional jump is a big one, but I think Ben's list is a pretty good one. It's definitely interesting. I'd love to see a goalkeeper go first, as being a former goalkeeper myself. I had Gabby Bitar going first in Ottawa as a local boy too. He's a known quantity, but all of those needs seem to match up with those players. And you're right, in the top 5 players, you want a guy that's going to make an impact almost immediately.
Exactly. You guys nailed it. We are going to take a quick break here. When we come back, it will be time for the draft. We will have all of the picks coming through, and as Steve gets nervous for all his Carleton boys. But we will be right back after this.
Hey guys, it's producer Jake here from Betting House. The Garage Door Sports. Catch our episodes weekly on Apple, Spotify, and Google as we bring you banter, laughter, and of course picks for all sorts of games throughout the week. Give us a follow on our socials at BettingHousePod, where you can catch all our bets each week, as well as some bonus content. Remember to always gamble responsibly. Let's get rich.
Are you looking for a weekly sports podcast filled with insight and analysis you can't get anywhere else? How about a show with 3 friends who truly love what they talk about? If so, Garage Door Sports is the podcast for you. Hosted by Nick McVicar, Kyle Vardy, and Irfan Manji, they bring you all the latest news, notes, and of course analysis on the sporting world. Are you ready for it? Let's go.
Hey everyone, this is Irfan Manji from Touchline Thoughts, powered by the Garage Door Sports Network. We are an all-soccer podcast hosted by yours truly and Paige Culver. We provide news, analysis, and opinions each episode as well. You can listen to us on your favorite podcatcher and follow us on Twitter or Instagram. Cheers.
The road has never been easy. And for those coming through now, even more obstacles have emerged.
This morning, I've declared a state of emergency in the province of Ontario.
But the path was paved by those who came before.
Cage, Verhoeven comes running in. Verhoeven now with space. How's it going? He ties the game in the 68th minute.
And with enough strength and focus. The best rise to the top.
From Langford with love, champions of the Canadian Premier League, Pacific FC.
But there's always more to come. So who's next?
With the first pick of the CPL USports Draft,
Ottawa
selects.
Oh, chills with that video. I love it. We are live, guys. It is time for the CPL Draft. And on the clock, we got to start with the team that we've talked a lot about already, but we're going to talk a little bit more about them. Atletico Ottawa does have the first pick in both rounds. They don't have a coach. Their roster is very limited right now. They have 7 players listed as returning for the moment. I want to start with you, Steve. Where does Ottawa go with this? Like, I'm not really sure what to expect from this pick.
It's kind of like the Nationals this year. It's just pure drama, right? I mean, I think you know what? I was going Batar, but I kind of like in the back of my mind, I did have Artemenko, obviously with the need as a goalkeeper, and he's I think he was far and away the best goalkeeper I saw this year. So yeah, I'm leaning towards the goalkeeper now. Ben's kind of influenced me in that regard, and I wouldn't be surprised, however, if they went for a goal scorer as well, as Julian mentioned. But right now, I'm leaning goalkeepers union. So I'm going to go with the goalie, the big man.
Ben, Steve says your goalkeeper pick is a good one. Artemenko is the obvious number one goalie at the moment, but could there be anybody else maybe that Ottawa is looking at, or is it Artemenko or forward for Ottawa at this point?
I think it's Artemenko or forward at this point. The only other goalkeeper that really comes to mind in the 164 available players is Bena Makai from the University of British Columbia. And UBC had an interesting season. They really folded late in games a few times. There were a few times against UNBC that they were up 3-0 in the last 10 minutes and tied the match 3-3. So it's a little worrying that he gave up so many goals late in the game, but maybe that could be a way they go. But I don't see them spending the top pick on that. I think it's either Artemenko or Cairo Coor at the top pick.
And Ben, you know what? I'm going to jump in there. I agree with you. I thought McKay had a good Nationals as well. And they were unfortunate to lose to Carleton. They were up 2-0, but he really impressed me as well.
He's a young guy as well, so he'll be back in this draft if he's not picked this year. So I think that's somebody to look at down the road. Whereas Artemenko is a guy that will be picked up and will sign professionally if you don't pick him up in this draft.
Julian,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, after seeing Artemenko play this past year, both coaching against him as well as watching him play in that semifinal game between Carleton and Guelph, he was a difference maker. He made some stops that you didn't think he was going to get to, and he basically is a number one. And whoever picks him, unless they've got an incumbent, he should be the one who starts.
And that's the thing. They don't have really an incumbent right now. As I mentioned, they only have 7 players signed for the next season. Miguel Acosta has re-signed. Drew Becky is returning. Ben McKendry is returning. Chris Manella, former York, I guess York 9 at the time, but now York United player. Zachary Verhoeven, Malcolm Shaw, and Brian Wright are their only returning players at the moment. Everyone else, their loans either ended or their options or contracts were declined or expired. So they really have holes. I hate to say this, but they have holes everywhere just because they don't have a roster. So that's why I see the goalie pick. I love the goalie pick. I think that's fantastic. But I just see so many other holes that could also be filled with this spot, and I just don't know where they go. And Steve, you mentioned Gabe Batar and the local guy, someone that they could probably – I know it's not what you're looking for with the number one pick, but somebody they could promote around, right? So like a hometown boy who can really be the key to their promotional status going forward, right?
Oh, and he's a lovely young man as well. He's a local boy. He's got a lot of friends here. He's been to nationals 4 times. He's never not been to nationals as a university player. As Ben mentioned, he's been drafted before. And And I think maybe maturity might have been an issue in the first, not disrespectfully saying that, but, he was a young guy. I think he still wanted to perhaps experience a university. I don't think he was all in like maybe Stefan Karjovanovic, who also went professional, but really, really bought into it. So I think this could be Gabby's time. Gabby's also a box-to-box player. I think, Julian, you could comment on that too. I mean, he is a target guy, but he's also a versatile guy. And he's a guy that Kwesi Loney has moved around sometimes on the park because he can dribble. He's got those little sort of shimmy steps. He's got those little shuffle moves that and boatloads of skill. He's a really interesting player. He's not a big guy, but he just really, really confident, and he just strikes the ball. He's even scored some cracking goals. He scored one at Ontario Tech. I watched that one on OUA TV. It was unbelievable. He just really strikes the ball well, and he's a good team guy, right? I mean, I think character is also an issue in drafts in any professional league, and I think Gabby's one of those guys you want to have in the locker room.
Absolutely,
I agree.
No, go ahead, Jules.
I was going to say, I agree with that, Steve. The thing with Gabby, and I think the thing that we've got to take into account too, is that because we're so used to seeing players come out of an academy in any pro league where they step in and they play. Well, the part that everybody forgets is that because you're coming from a university setting and you're going into a pro setting, there isn't necessarily unless you've got a strong culture. And think about it, he was the first pick overall in the first CPL USports Draft. So he was going into a culture that wasn't quite formed yet. And now he's coming in as one of those elder statesmen where he's played in a culture for 3 years under a coach who's built a culture at Carleton. And now he knows how to step in. He now knows how to lead. And he's been moved around, as you said. Kwesi's moved him around. He's played him in the 10 spot. He's played him out on the wing. He's played him in the 9 spot. So because he's played him in all these positions and he's excelled, because he is a poacher, he's just an outright poacher, and he knows how to set things up as well. Because he's that type of a player, then, that's a kind of a player that now he's seasoned. He can step in even though he's still fairly young.
It's so true. And you mentioned the fact that a bunch of these players have been drafted before, right? And Gabe Bitar is the obvious one because he was the first overall pick in the first USports Draft. Ben, what does that speak of to this draft system that these guys have gone through it, a few of them, and now they're going through it again, possibly getting drafted by the same team? Like you mentioned, Garcia might go back to Valor, or maybe a different team wants to take a shot with them. What does that kind of tell you about this draft specifically?
Well, this draft has changed over the years as well, and it's only in its third or fourth year, but it's changed basically every time that the draft comes about. This year, players were able to enter themselves. That's why there's 164 of them available, rather than being nominated by their coaches, where you have a list of 40 or 50. So there's that change. But the change also this year is that players have their rights retained. They don't have to be drafted again to sign another USports contract. So Chris Lee at Pacific, for example, he's still at the University of British Columbia, but there's a good chance that he'll go back to Pacific in the spring and in the summer, and then go back to UBC in the fall. And that's because Pacific still have his rights after drafting him last year and signing him to a USports contract. So that sort of changes the way things look this year. And Gabe Bitar is the perfect example of why that rule came in, is because Gabe Bitar was picked 2 years in a row by Cavalry because they liked what they saw. Whereas what would have made more sense, and is now the case, is they would have kept his contract for another year on a USports contract that would have let him maintain an eligibility and come back to Cavalry the year after, and Cavalry can take another shot at a draft pick. So this draft has continuously changed, and it'll continue to change. So it's different every year, and this is just what we're presented with this year.
Nick, do you mind if I jump in there too? Sorry, unless you've got a...
No, absolutely.
Ben,
go ahead, Steve.
I was just really curious on that. I don't know the CPL like the both of you do, and that was a really curious thing. I'm not sure why that happened. Can you maybe explain that, Ben? Why he went sort of again in the draft the second year? For those people at home who may not know.
So in the first couple of years of the CPL, you only drafted the guy for the opening or the season that you drafted him in, right? And there wasn't unless you signed him to a multi-year contract, there wasn't any commitment outside of that year. And Gabe Bitar wanted to maintain his USports eligibility, so he signed a USports contract, which allowed him to play up until the fall. in that first 2019 season. Then he goes back to Carleton, and then he wants to come back into the professional game. Cavalry wants him again. The only way to get him back and to be able to sign a U Sports deal was through the draft at that point. Now you see players are able to sign U Sports deals outside of the draft. Look at Marcus Kaiser on Cavalry this year. He's available for selection today. Even though he's already signed a U Sports deal in the CPL, he's still able to go into this draft. So there's a lot of different confusing ways that either you're retained for 2 years now, but back then it was only one. So Chris Lee's not available. Chris Lee could have been available if he didn't sign that 1 year contract or that U Sports contract with Pacific. So it's not as confusing as MLS with the TAM and the GAM and designated player spots and stuff like that, but it's still quite confusing.
That's a great explanation, though. So thank you for that, Ben. Before we get to the pick, because it is coming up, I do want to get to Steve's top 25 available players. He put this list together over the last few days, and I want to run through them. So quickly, we'll go through it right now. First up on his list, he does have Gabby Bitar and then Artemenko are 1 and 2, which makes sense. These are the guys that we've been talking about right from the beginning. Then you got Pommier, Coor, Garcia, Conte, Marzouk, Dolo, Campoli, and El Gander. So anything you want to mention about those guys there, Steve?
Well, it's funny. I did want to mention a couple of York players too, Olatoy and Marzouk, good players. They were. That's not necessarily in order. I not unlike Ben. I didn't really match them up to teams' needs. Again, I'm not really a huge expert on the CPL. I'm more of a fan than anything. So, but yeah, I mean, Carleton had a strong season. I really like Pommier. I thought Pommier was a really impactful player. I mean, Asome Panda gets a lot of glory on that Montreal team, but Pommier was a fantastic player, especially at nationals. Loved the big goalkeeper, obviously. Yeah, and I mean, it was a list really. I also gleaned a lot of it from Ben Steiner's article as well, because my West Coast knowledge is not up to snuff. But really, my experience at nationals exposed me to a few players that I hadn't really seen before. But we were talking off camera a little bit before, Ben, Julian, and I about Quebec and the Quebec soccer culture. Pat Raimondo at Montreal has done an amazing job of developing his team, his culture, and players. So it wouldn't be surprising if Ben, you probably agree, if 2 or 3 Montreal players went in this draft. There's also, if I'm pronouncing his name right, Balbatoni from UQTR, the national champions in 2019. Where Carleton lost a heartbreaker to those boys, but he was an impressive player. I didn't get to see him this year, but he's a guy that could possibly go. I'm not sure if he will go in the draft, but he's certainly a player to watch. And let me see. Yeah,
let me get to the next 10 in your big board, because I only did the first 10. In the next 10, you have Ricci, Lynch, Domic, Rafasami, Menard. You mentioned Balbinati already, and Olatoy. Roseland is another interesting one. Sulalem and Villefort are your top 20, and then of course the last 5 in your top 25, I guess we'll say. You also have Wibley, Kobza, Mortas, Hamad, and Martin. So it's a good list. I think, as you mentioned, it's kind of a combination between you, Ben, and a bunch of other guys as well. You were reaching out to a ton of people to get their insight, which is great. It just adds a little bit more to the show. So we're still waiting on the first pick, folks. We are going to bring that to you as soon as it comes. Julian, is there anything you wanted to add to the boys talking about Ottawa?
I think that there's a couple of dark horses as well that we got to take into account here, because there's kids like, just in being around the Ontario area. I was going to say Jacob Begley for a second, who plays at Ontario Tech. The thing is that he's listed as a center back. He's 6'5", little man feet, and he grew up playing as a holding midfielder. So playing in that 6 role is something that's natural to him. The reason why Ontario Tech has played him as a center back is because of the need that they had. And he's a big body and he's great in the air, but he also distributes well from that spot. So he could be a dark horse because he also can play in two positions. He can play in either the center back spots, or he can play in that holding spot. And not only that, he can fend side to side, and distribute well.
It's true. And I want to mention that we are at the pick. And it's Jose Cunha going to Atletico Ottawa. João Felix actually was the one who announced the pick. So a bit of a dark horse there, Ben, I guess?
Yeah. You probably saw my facial reaction as Jose de Cunha is selected by Atletico Ottawa. He's a skilled player in the middle of the park. He can win tackles, and he can get the ball over the top to have some success in the attacking end. But I'm surprised he goes this high in the draft. He was a Forge pick last season. Never really cracked the Bobby Simriotis' side, but definitely a piece that is going to be usable for Atletico Ottawa. A skilled piece, one of the better players in U Sports. Just sort of surprised it didn't go with Artemenko, but fantastic opportunity for a team like York United, who need to shore up their goalkeeping as well, to take in Artemenko a bit later in this draft.
Well, you mentioned the York United add-on, but I'm not sure if they are necessarily going to put a draft pick into a goaltender. They do have Giantsopoulos there, who is a good shot stopper. So if they don't pick a goalie in the draft, they might pick one up. They obviously have to because he's the only one on the roster at the moment. But Steve, what do you make of this first pick?
I'm shocked as well. I mean, I'm only familiar with him from the national championships and quite frankly, I didn't think he had a great tournament. I mean, he's a good player. You could see the pedigree for sure, but there were times where I thought he drifted in and out of the game. So perhaps that was, again, maybe just had a bad weekend. But as Ben said, he's a skillful player. He's someone you can work with. He's obviously knowledgeable. I believe he is from Portugal, Portuguese born. So yeah, it is a surprise pick, but that's why drafts are fun.
It's true. That is why drafts are fun. Absolutely. Jules, anything you want to add?
You know what? I'm surprised by the pick, but the more I think about it, it makes sense probably with Atletico's philosophy and what they're trying to do, because you have a player who's grown up in a foreign system. He's over here going to school. He's shown well in his division. Didn't show well at nationals per se, but he's shown well in his division. And he understands probably the philosophy of what Atletico will be trying to do. So it makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah, I guess if you look at it that way, it does make sense. I think it's just we were all surprised because we were convinced that it was going to be either Artemenko or a striker or a forward, I guess I should say. Not necessarily an out-and-out striker, but an attacking player. But it is a team that struggled defensively. Like, they didn't get the opportunities, or they didn't stop the opportunities, I should say. So maybe bringing in a guy like Dacuna is the right move, right, Ben?
I definitely see it as it's an interesting move, right? Because he didn't crack Forge's roster. Now, Forge is a lot stronger than Atletico Ottawa was and is going to be. So I think Jose de Cunha, after having a successful year with the Cape Breton Capers, will find a place in the Atletico Ottawa roster. But they have a lot banking on what might be a bit of a reach here, because I think they probably could have gotten him later in this draft if the draft goes on. And they need to hit on this because they need a quality player from this draft. They need to hit on the top pick, and that's Jose de Cunha. So it's a tough one to call exactly whether this is the right pick for Atletico Ottawa. Tremendous upside, but there's no guarantee that this works out because it was a bit of a reach.
He's also a fairly he's also a fairly big body as well, right? So he's a guy that I think can assert himself. And yeah, Ben's right though. There is upside here, which I think probably Ottawa is obviously banking on.
Absolutely. Let's turn our attention to pick number 2 now while we get ready for it. FC Edmonton, we've already talked about where they've sort of struggled off air, the four of us, but this is a team that technically currently has nobody signed for next year. No one confirmed coming back yet. They obviously have a bunch of players that will come back, but they have lost the likes of Easton Ongaro, Roberto Avila, Thomas Giraldo, Alan Zeeby, and Connor James, their keeper. So this could be another potential sneaky keeper spot for a team that didn't do very well keeping the ball out of their own net this year. Steve, Where do you kind of think these guys go with this pick?
I'm not sure, Ben. I think you had Elgando perhaps in this spot. I mean, he's a guy that they'd probably be familiar with, and that's when I was looking through the draft. He's the guy that popped into my mind as well. Ben, I'm not plagiarizing you, but it made some sense to me. I mean, he had such a big season as well, so he's the guy that comes to mind. I didn't mention him earlier, but Campoli. I know Julie and I were talking a bit about Campoli from Tech. Had a very good university season. I know he's been drafted before by York and wasn't terribly successful there. I know Julian, you could probably comment a bit on that, but yeah, I'm kind of leaning toward the West Coast boy, to be honest. El Gandor. He plays in that area. I think it would also marketing wise be probably a good move. Yeah, so that's probably where I'm leaning on that bit.
Fair enough.
He's also
Julian,
a
you
goal
want to jump
scorer.
in there?
To be quite honest with you, I think that he actually probably would be the perfect pick for what Edmonton needs, because Edmonton now needs somebody local. They need somebody who can step in right away. And they also need somebody who who's, how to put this, is marketable, because he's a good looking guy. He's tall. He's personable, and he carries himself well on the field from the film that I've seen on him. And I think that he actually would be a good idea. And really, he's from up the road, or he's from down the road. He's playing in Calgary, so with his school. So if he goes to Edmonton, he can only get seasoned and get better. And he's playing for a very good coach in Alan Koch, who is the one constant who can build culture. Coming out of Mount Royal, where they built a culture of winning now, Alan Koch knows what he's doing, because Alan Koch won as a college and university coach. So he knows what he's doing. He knows how to relate to those players.
Absolutely true. And the second pick is in, and we're wrong again. It's Cairo Coor going to FC Edmonton. So 2 Cape Breton players going back to back, if I'm not mistaken there. Ben, going to throw to you right away, man. What do you think of this one?
If you could score 5 goals in a draft, they just did that. They just picked probably the best player in the draft. And I'm surprised he went this high, even though he is the best player in this draft. But Cairo Coor, absolutely exceptional. Easily the best goal scorer in U Sports. Played NCAA Div 2 for a year, then came to Cape Breton, played under Dino Morley, had tremendous success with the CBU Capers. I think he's one of the most dynamic forwards ever to play in the modern era of Canadian University soccer. I love this pick. They've completely replaced Easton Ongaro at this point. I'm just surprised that they went with a guy from the East Coast rather than taking Moel Gondor, who probably could have filled that role to an extent, but that's an absolutely outstanding pick. And the FC Edmonton just got substantially better by selecting Cairo Coor. He's incredible. Watching the AUS this season, our 49 reporter Luke Diamond was all over Cairo Coor, and I only saw him on streams. He was incredible on streams, but in person, apparently he was another level.
He's an extreme talent, as you said. This is a guy who showed out at the national championships this year. So I'm going to throw to Steve first. Steve, what do you make of this pick?
Yeah, it's a great pick. I mean, he is a great player. At Nationals, Cape Breton were disappointed with their performance a little bit at Nationals, but I saw the tape on him too, and Ben's exactly right. He's a game changer. He's a goal scorer. He's also very athletic. So I mean, he's not just a poacher. He's a guy. He's a box to box guy, right? So he works hard. Dino must be very, very pleased with the way the draft's going, because I mean the culture out there is super solid, right? I mean, everybody knows you play soccer in Canada, you know about Cape Breton. So no, it's not. It is. Ben's right. It's a surprise that he's an East Coast boy going all the way out to Edmonton, but you can't go wrong with that pick. Quality.
Well, I hate to interrupt so fast, but the third pick is already in. Sorry, Jules, I'm going to cut you off, but you're going to get the first crack at this, because HFX has selected Chris Campoli, 3rd overall. So you mentioned him in the pregame. You know him personally, kind of. So what do you make of this pick for HFX?
I think it's a fantastic pick for Halifax. They have turned around and they've picked up somebody who can help them. This is his second stint in the draft, and first time he didn't really get a good shot, wasn't a good fit in the mix as far as I'm concerned with the 9 stripes. But in Halifax, he fills a need that they have, and they want somebody who can actually, one, be young, have great legs, and is willing to work and do the hard work. Because you're playing for Stephen Hart, then you have to be able to do the work. He's got a fantastic attitude, and know him a little bit. Also coached with his older brother, who was also a standout OUA All-Star at Ontario Tech, and great family, great attitude, and he will work out well. I know Stephen and the folks at Halifax have done their homework on him, and I'm glad to see that somebody has gone high. That wow, I didn't expect it this early, but I think it's fantastic.
And Steve, you're another Ontario guy, so why don't you jump in on the conversation on Campoli and what he brings to Halifax?
Yeah, he's a dynamic player. I mean, I've seen him a few times when he came up to Carleton. He's a guy you notice right away, and he scored a massive goal when I believe they beat York. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, in the regular season. He scored a cracking goal at the end of that game that I watched on tape. So, yeah, and as Julian always has spoken very highly of him as well, and again, good attitude. Didn't work out in the first draft for him, but he's obviously matured. But yeah, a bit surprised he went that high for sure. He's not a big dude, but he's a dynamic player, and it's a good pick it's a very, very good pick.
And the 4th pick is now coming in live, and Valor has selected. I didn't hear the name. Sorry, give me 1 second. Oh, Rain Lynn from Cape Breton. So 3 Cape Breton players already gone. This is a player who wasn't on your list, Steve, and I don't know if he was even on the top 40 list from 49 Sports, Ben. Ben, what do you make of this pick?
This is a reach. He's not in my top 30. I think they could have gotten him as a U Sports free agent. I don't think he was in demand. It's weird to see another player go from the same school in the top 3. It's a reach. Rainlin, he's a quality midfielder, but it'll be interesting to see exactly where he comes in with Valor. I don't think he's necessarily pro ready at this point. So he's going to be a guy who's going to come off the bench if he signs a CPL USports contract. It's a weird pick, this one. Maybe Philip Dos Santos doesn't entirely understand the draft and needing to find somebody to instant impact in the first season. But that's a weird one. I'm at a bit of a loss for that one.
Steve, you saw him at Nationals. I don't know what else to add to what Ben said, but is there anything that you can add?
Yeah, I feel the same. I mean, Cape Breton's got a solid 11. So to be a starter on Cape Breton, you've got to be a good player, and there's no doubt he is. But I would agree with Ben's assessment. He didn't. He's a bigger dude, if I remember correctly. But yeah, so perhaps there's some potential there, some development. That also could be character too. Maybe there's been some communication there already. Perhaps there's some information that we don't know about. But yeah, I agree with Ben. He probably could have been had in the second round if they were going to take a chance there. I think if you're looking at taking the best player in the top 5 spot, the best player available as opposed to filling a need, it's an interesting pick if I'm going to be politically correct. But yeah, very, very surprised. There's been some surprises already, and we're only 4 picks in.
Julian, you want to jump in and add there?
I was going to say he's a Dos Santos. So they both, he and his brother have a way of finding things that nobody else looks for and finding players to plug into places that nobody thought they could fit. They're both mad scientists as far as I'm concerned when it comes to being coaches. And so they both think the same way. They both see things about players, and they truly are coaches and managers because they see things with players, as I've said, that you normally wouldn't see. And maybe there's a need that he figures after seeing his team last year that he sees that this kid can fill in with.
Fair enough. Well, I'm at a loss for this one because, as I said, this was a guy that wasn't even on the lists that we were going through, like the top 40s, the top 30s that I saw all over. This wasn't a guy that was even talked about. So far we've had 3 Cape Breton players go. is this a testament to how good that team was, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, it is on some level, I think. I mean, they're noticeable when they take the pitch. Again, I'd only really seen them on tape. I saw them at Nationals in 2019, a little bit of a different team, but yeah, I mean, it is. It says a lot about Dino, doesn't it? I mean, he grooms players to be professional. Some of them, I think, come to him with a pedigree already. But yeah, it's interesting. Like Jules, I like the mad scientist, Jules. That's a great thing. Obviously, they've seen something here, and they think they've got a bit of a plan, perhaps to and maybe a need to fill. But yeah, back to Cape Breton though. Yeah, it's amazing to have three of the top four go to Cape Breton. But when you think of what they've done over the last five years, even a decade, it's maybe not that big of a surprise because it's a bit of a safe pick in that you're getting a guy that's been coached at a high level, that's come through a culture. So perhaps those were factors in drafting this player.
And we have the 5th pick. So, Ben, I'm going to throw it to you right after this. But the 5th pick is in, and York United have selected forward Christian Rossi from Trinity Western out in the Can West Division. You said that they needed to go probably get a striker. Hey, you thought it was going to be Gabby Batar. They go with Rossi, the younger player from Trinity Western. Ben, do you like the pick?
I love the pick. He was the U Sports Rookie of the Year this season with Trinity Western, and he was exceptional against some very good competition in Canada West. I think of a couple games against UBC where Trinity Western came out late in the game and he scored a brace. UBC was up 4-1 in the last 5 minutes, and it ended up 4-4, and Christian Rossi was integral in that comeback. Exceptional throughout the season. He's played on a much bigger pitch at Trinity Western, so he's able to find spaces in behind. The question will be whether he's able to find spaces on a bit of a smaller than average pitch at York Lions Stadium. But I love the pick, and having him for potentially 2 years is going to really build around York United.
Yeah, and you mentioned he was the Rookie of the Year, and we haven't had any of the other award winners just yet come up, but they probably will be mentioned. Again, I don't know what to make of this pick, but we're already on to the next one as Cavalry has made their selection, and it is defender Caden Rogozinski from, I'm sorry, I completely blanked on where he's from, but he is a defender going to Cavalry. Julian, what do you make of this pick for Cavalry?
I don't question Tommy Wetton Jr. He knows what he's doing. He's been successful. The only thing he hasn't done is lift the silverware in this league. They have a bit of a need at the back, and picking up Caden from Mount Royal makes sense. He stays local. He's in town. And now he can be seasoned and he can be part of that culture at the same time. If it doesn't work out, he just goes back to Mount Royal. That's all.
Fair enough.
I think it's a great idea and a great pick.
Fair enough. Ben,
young.
you want to add in on that?
Yeah, I like the pick. Definitely off the board. But in terms of picking a local guy that probably has some connections to Tommy Wheeldon Jr., he's a true freshman this season on a very good Mount Royal team. So I like the pick. It'll be interesting to see exactly if he settles in with the Cavalry system, because Cavalry haven't found a lot of success with their U Sports Draft picks.
Yeah, this is a good Cavalry team. They were back-to-back finalists prior to this year. This year they didn't make it there. Steve, bringing in a young player like Rogozinski is always a risk, but I think there is a great chance that he either, if he doesn't crack the roster, he could end up being back here afterwards, right?
Yeah, I think it's a win-win, isn't it? Because, I mean, he gets that experience. He gets into a different culture that's professional now. He's coming from a fantastic culture. And I know we throw that word culture around, but it's super important. I mean, we've seen teams die that don't have the culture, right? So, no, this is a win-win for him. His family must be ecstatic. I mean, he goes high in the draft. He wasn't really on a lot of people's radar who were so-called experts. So, it's a surprise, but it's not a surprise because clearly these teams are willing to look at youthful players, players with potential, and that's really encouraging.
Absolutely, and I mean we're already looking towards the next team in the draft, and I really don't know where Forge needs to go. You had them going with Soji I'm gonna totally mess that up. Olatoy's pick in this one, Ben. Do you think they stick with that?
I don't think they're going to stick with that because there's so many more talented players available. So this will be interesting where it goes. Bobby Simriotis just stepping up now.
And they definitely did not go with that. They went with center back Guillaume Pianelli from Trois-Rivières. So another off-the-board defender coming in here. Obviously, center back is something that Forge could look at, but is this a surprise to you, Ben?
It's a bit of a surprise. But when I think of it a bit more, it's not necessarily a total shock because he's probably one of the best, if not the best center back in the RCQ, helped UQTR to the semifinal this season and thriving against one of the better teams in Montreal. And Bobby Simriotis has gone to the UQTR before by picking Gabriel Valbonati a couple of years ago. So he knows that program. He's scouted that program. But it is nonetheless a little bit surprising that they would go with a center back because they've been good defensively and they have Tristan Henry in goal, who's also a pretty solid goalkeeper for when their defense gets past. But maybe this is looking at potentially losing a guy like Kwame Awua and a bit of solidity in their defensive structure. Awua, not a center back, but at least somebody who sort of shored up defensively. And so they do bring in another level there, but certainly an interesting one by Simriotis and Forge.
Yeah, I'm surprised by this because you mentioned that this is a team that is pretty good defensively. I'm not going to say they're the best defensive team in the league, but they're pretty good defensively. They've shown it on not only the CPL level, but in the CONCACAF ranks as well. And now they're going center back with their first round pick. Steve, is that a bit of a surprise for you as well?
I mean, it's one of the key positions, so not really. I would say that having a center back, I mean, you got to be strong up the middle, really, and a lot of sports, and soccer is one of them. And goalkeeper, center, midfielder, center back, striker, right? I mean, those. And as Ben said, he's one of the best players in this conference at that position, if not the best. So I'm not sure his age. Ben, you might be able to help me out on that one, but I'm not really surprised at the pick, and it's a key position, and he can certainly play it, and it's only going to make him better having this experience. And he comes from a good culture too. That program when I played was an average program, but they've become one of the elite programs in U Sports for men's soccer.
Well, as we were talking, we already have the next pick in, and rounding out the first round, the champion Pacific FC have selected Luca Richie from Montreal Carabao to solidify their midfield. 23-year-old midfielder will join the Pacific team, going pretty much across the country from Montreal to Vancouver Island. So what do you make of this pick, Jules?
I think it's a great pick because you've got somebody who's a little bit older, a little bit more mature. He's been under Pat for the last 3 years at least. I believe he did. He's also done a little bit of time in the PLSQ as well. And I was very impressed with him at Nationals this year. And I thought that he did a fantastic job holding down the midfield. He was the calming influence, especially when they spent a lot of time in the final behind Carleton. He calmed them down. He was that no matter how hostile the fans got and how heightened the game got, he managed to keep the team intact. And when I've forgotten his name, the captain went down, he still managed to settle the ship until they got their second goal, until they got their goal. And then when they went ahead, he again kept them calm. And yes, Carleton scored and then it went to PKs, but he was a settling influence out there. Very good player, very strong on the ball, and very good vision from what I saw.
And Ben, you have a little bit of added information on Ricci. Do you want to throw it in there now?
Yeah. So Luca Richie is probably the only player in U Sports to have already played with the Champions League winner and World Cup veteran in Didier Drogba when he had a very brief cup of coffee with Phoenix Rising in the USL. And Didier Drogba, co-owner in that club, went thereafter playing with CF Montreal. So they did overlap for a little while. And if you go to Luca Richie's Instagram, you can see that there's a few photos with Drogba. So certainly interesting that one's going to Pacific FC and the other's a Chelsea legend, but there's not too many players in U Sports to play with Champions League winners.
No, not too many at all. And before we take a quick break, Ben, you were going to jump off after this, but give us your thoughts on the first round as a whole before you head out.
Well, that was surprising, the first round. I didn't predict any of those correctly in my mock draft. So maybe that's it for mock drafts for me. But surprising, very interesting to see the top three all go from the same school, as well as a lot of older players selected in that first round, because wasn't really expecting so many older players to get selected.
And you were killing it with that factoid though, man. The Drogba, come on, that's a good bit. That's a good bit of journalism right there. That's a good bit of journalism, brother.
Well, I've got a thick binder here from the U Sports Championships, and I called a fair number of the University of Montreal games, so got a bit of information on them.
You did well there.
Ben, thank you so much for joining us for the first round. Folks, don't go anywhere. We will still have the rest of the draft. We're going to take a quick break, reset, and bring you the second round right after this.
Hey guys, it's producer Jake here from Betting House, the Garage Door Sports Network's ultimate degenerate gambling podcast. Catch our episodes weekly on Apple, Spotify, and Google as we bring you banter, laughter, and of course picks for all sorts of games throughout the week. Give us a follow on our socials at Betting House Pod, where you can catch all our bets each week, as well as some bonus content. Remember to always gamble responsibly. Let's get rich.
Are you looking for a weekly sports podcast filled with insight and analysis you can't get anywhere else? How about a show with three friends who truly love what they talk about? If so, Garage Door Sports is the podcast for you. Hosted by Nick McVicar, Kyle Vardy, and Irfan Manji, they bring you all the latest news, notes, and of course analysis on the sporting world. Are you ready for it? Let's go.
Hey everyone, this is Irfan Manji from Touchline Thoughts, powered by the Garage Door Sports Network. We are an all-soccer podcast hosted by yours truly and Paige Culver. We provide news, analysis, and opinions each episode as well. You can listen to us on your favorite podcatcher and follow us on Twitter or Instagram. Cheers.
Me that.
All right, folks, we are back. Nick McVicar, Julian Carr, Steve Ball, bringing you the rest of the CPL USports Draft. It was great having Ben on. Ben nailed it, though, on his way out. This has been a very, very surprising draft so far. We've seen players go way higher or way off the board, I guess is the best way to put it. And not a whole lot of guys that we expected at the top. What do you make of it so far, Steve?
Yeah, it's been surprising, but again, Julie and I were just chatting a bit off air and saying, there's information out there. It's such an interesting draft because there's so many players, and there's obviously there's different philosophies in draft, right? Do you take the best player available? Do you take players to fill needs? We've got teams in this league that, as you said, barely have an indoor side, so. They're looking for bodies, and they're also looking to perhaps like take a chance. And obviously 2 or 3 teams in the first round here took a chance and maybe saw things that other people didn't see. It also indicates to me that U Sports very, very strong and deeper than perhaps than we think. I mean, there is a bit of a drop off between the elite teams and then the next level. But look at Cape Breton. I mean, super well represented, and we've still got another round to go. And there's a few players on my list on Cape Breton alone that haven't even been looked at. So Montreal again represented here. Carleton hasn't had a player picked yet, and as a former Carleton boy, but these are deep teams. And so Laval's got a couple of players that were on my list as well. So some surprises, but again, filling needs and looking at youth. Perhaps a leadership and having guys in the room that's going to, as Julian mentioned, building a culture. You want to add to that culture. Campoli is a really good pick in the first round. So yeah, surprised, but this is what makes drafts exciting, isn't it?
I want to see what the second round brings, because from what I gather from the first round, it's building on that culture thing is maturity. You see a lot of the players are a little bit older, and because they're older, I think that's what teams are looking for now. It's like, if you've got a bunch of local kids in your side and you can bring somebody in who you can season for a year and then bring them back the second year, makes sense. But right now, when you've got to build on your first pick, you need somebody who's got a little bit more maturity and can handle the rigors of the pro game.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, that really, I think in my top, I think Campoli was in there, but Ricci not surprised, obviously. I think with his experience as well. But yeah, it would be interesting to see if a goalkeeper goes. I mean, we were talking a little bit off air about Artemenko and obviously the need for goalkeeper, and he was, for me, he was such a dominant goalkeeper in his division. So yeah, the second round, you're right. It could be a reverse, Nick? It could be a situation where they took chances in the first round and might play it a bit more safe in the second round, which we rarely see in drafts.
And I apologize, folks. I was muted there. I will repeat all that. But first pick in the second round went to Bruce from Montreal, was taken, the forward. And now the second pick is already in for FC Ottawa, and they have taken Quentin Palmier. So back-to-back Montreal picks to start the second round. Steve, you saw these guys at Nationals. You've seen them a lot, probably, as a guy who lives in Ottawa. What do you make of these two picks back-to-back?
Yeah, not surprised. Palmier is a great player. I believe he's French, from France, the south of France, and scored the goal to propel them into overtime and win them a national championship. And he's got composure. He just carries himself like a player. He's got style. It's a good pick for Ottawa. I think I don't know him personally, but I know Pat Raimondo quite well. And if you come through Pat Raimondo's program, then you're a character human being. And that's a really good pick. I'm really pleased for Ottawa.
Julian, these guys playing in Montreal are two solid players, obviously in a very good system. What do you make of these two picks back to back?
I think it makes complete sense for both teams. Again, Edmonton needs a leader to build, and Ottawa needs a goal scorer, and they've got that. They found that athletic player who's weak, tricky on the ball, play either on a wing or play up front, and can fill those shoes that they need to fill the net, point blank. And we talk about leadership. Two now gets a leader. We're talking about the captain of the team, talking about somebody he wasn't just a one-time captain. He was a second-year captain. He would have been a third-year captain if it hadn't been for COVID. Quality individual. And the truth of the matter is it speaks to how Pat has actually rebuilt that program, because when he started this 4 or 5 years ago, he had an issue. So what he did was he actually scrapped a lot of his team and brought in a whole bunch of young players and built with those young players. And you saw the culmination of that this year again, when they won their second championship in 3 years.
Very true. And now we're looking towards the third pick, and it looks like it is about to come through. But where does HFX really need to find a body here? Like, we saw what they did in the first round, Steve. Where do you think they go?
The first round's kind of thrown me, Nick.
Very true.
Right? I mean, maybe a Rafi Garcia. He's a guy that for me, he's a top 10 guy. He's a guy that he's a versatile. He's a defender, but he could pop up in the midfield. He's a smaller guy, but he can score goals. He's tricky.
Well, here, let me cut you off. Ready? They went on the other side of the field. Instead of right back, they went left back. Colin Gander from Guelph. Right idea. You had the right idea.
And I'm not super familiar with Gander. I saw Guelph a little bit. Unfortunately, they don't broadcast their games on OUA TV, so I didn't get a chance. I know from talking to Kwesi, he was very impressed with their back line. Good coach there with Keith Mason as well at Guelph. I know Julian, I think you were actually at the semifinal in person. So we were talking a lot about Artemenko. I'm a bit surprised by the pick, Nick, to be honest. I'm not sure, Jules, if you agree, but a little bit surprised. But obviously there was a bit of a need there, and he's a solid defender.
Yeah, I was going to say, Gander, I've coached against him in League One Ontario, as well as I watched that semifinal game. And then I watched a couple of I actually watched the York final against York. Gander is great coming in off the wing. He's a good attacking wing back. He can cross the ball very nicely. And he's tenacious when it comes to defending. In the Carleton game, he wasn't afraid to mix things up. And it wasn't a physical presence, which he can be, but it was also, he was surgical in his tackles. Like very clean in what he did, very clean in how he defended, and moves the ball very nicely. If they needed to put him on the off wing, on the right wing back spot, they could do that. Also, because he can attack and attack so well, not sure exactly how comfortable he would be coming from the front and then attacking forward, but very much so can run that overlap all the time. Keith did a very good job with him, and yeah, it doesn't surprise me that Stephen picked him up.
It's great for Guelph too, isn't it? Like, that's good for Guelph. I mean, Guelph had a fantastic year, disappointing nationals, right? OUA champions. Yeah, good for Guelph. That's a nice pick.
And the fourth pick of round 2 is already in. We didn't even get to talk about Valor again, but they have gone with Rams midfielder Jacob Carlos. I will not say the university name, but Rams pick. No, he is their pick, Jacob Carlos. Steve, you've already obviously seen him a little bit this year or watched a little bit of their video. What do you make of Carlos going to Valor?
Again, it's a bit of a surprise, but he's a good player. So, I mean, I think I had Kai Martin from the Rams on my list. So Julian, you might know him a little bit better than I do, but I've just seen him on the tape. Not surprising, athletic player. Not sure of his age, but again, comes from a, although it pains me to say it, comes from a very good program. So, Jules, I'm going to throw that one to you.
If depending on the system that Phil plays, he can play that box to box, that 8 midfielder.
Yeah,
and and he's a good link, and he's a tenacious defender and hard worker. Have known of him for years, and he does very well. He actually, at one point when I was coaching at Alliance, Ilya Orlov from U of T actually tried to get him to come play when we were in that ill-fated 2020 season where there was no season. So he is a very good player. He is smart. And the good thing about him is that he's patient when he plays, but he also has a little bit of an edge to him as well. Very good passer. And like I said, the hard work in itself pays off. Yeah, he'll fit well in Valor, especially with what it looks like Philip dos Santos is building there.
That's a good point. I think it seems to be like they've got a bit of a plan going here, like you said, Jules, a mad scientist plan maybe, but they've clearly got a certain vision in store for the next season, and I think they see him plugging into their system.
Dos Santos, the mad scientist, is putting everything together, is what you're saying there, Julian and Steve?
He's mixing. He's mixing.
Yeah, he's mixing. Love that. All right. Well, it looks like York is ready to pick. Martin Nash is currently on the screen with Christian Jack. So Jules, where does York go?
They need a striker. They need somebody who can finish.
Well, they got that. They got that.
Oh, yeah.
They picked Soji Olatoy from York University. So they got their striker.
Yep.
You called it. You said exactly what they needed, and they went and grabbed it. So what is this pick, Steve?
He's a good player, and I mean, he's a York guy as well. So like, yeah, Jules, you know him a bit better. I'm going to throw that one to you. But I'm always impressed with York. Obviously, although it pains me to say that as a Carleton guy, but again, comes to the right culture. He not surprising by the pick. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. So they could have gone elsewhere perhaps, but not surprised by the pick at all.
You know what? He's local, and so then that means that. And that's something else too that we got to take into account. I'll get back to Soji in a second, but having players that can fit into what you need, and having them be local, so it means that they're either living at home or they've already got living arrangements where they've got a roommate or they're living with a significant other, makes life so much easier. Because now you don't have to get a player situated. You don't have to get him with his roommates. He might not get along with his teammates. He might get along with his teammates to play, but not to live with. He might not like the situation. He's so far away from home. This way, he's close to home. He is home. And also, knew Soji a bit growing up, and a very good player, very talented player, hard worker. And it doesn't surprise me that he's ended up here. But the other side of it too is now you've got a connection that you've got him and you've got Isaiah Johnson, who can basically find him, because Soji will make himself available.
He's a good athlete too, Jules? And that's another thing.
Fantastic athlete.
Yeah, I mean, clearly athleticism he's got potential. He's still got upside too, right? He's not a young guy. He's 22. So, I mean, he's got experience. It's a good pick for me.
All right, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm going to have to, because the next pick is already in, and Cavalry have gone with UBC. Marcus Kaiser is the next pick in the draft, 14th overall. Kind of sucks that we lost Ben because he's our Can West guy, but I'm going to defer to you, Steve. What do you make of the Kaiser pick?
Yeah, you know what? I actually like Kaiser. UBC. UBC went down in the quarterfinals to Carleton at Nationals. That was my really only exposure to him, but I do remember calling his name a lot. He's a defender, a good player. He can get forward as well. I was impressed with him at Nationals. In fact, I think he was one of UBC's better players. Not surprised. I wasn't sure on UBC when I was looking at my top 25. Because I didn't think they had anyone that really stood out to me. They were a pretty balanced team, well coached, good system, but didn't have tons of skill. They were more of a working team, which is a bit surprising coming from UBC that generally were always in the conversation. So, but no, I thought Kaiser was one of the better players on that team. So, this, Julie, you might be able to speak more to the need of the team itself, but Kaiser, quality player and leadership as well, which I think seems to be a theme in this draft thus far, is looking at players who can bring something else other than their ability. Also, having leadership is clearly important in this draft so far.
Yeah, he makes sense again because he's fitting into a culture that's already built with a great culture builder. And I do believe that one thing about it is that just in knowing him from a player that played with UBC, a former player of mine that played with UBC, he speaks very highly of him, thinks the world of him, thinks the kid is a fantastic individual, and he's a leader. And that helps, especially when you're in your midfield. Now, and he's versatile enough that you can play him in 3 or 4 positions. So wherever you need him, and he's willing to do the work. The one graphic that they used with him with the CPL with Canada West is him actually attacking the goal with his head. And so with that, when you've got a midfielder who can use his head and is comfortable using his head, that's always a bonus as well.
That's a good point, Jules. He was really good in the air. That's something I did know from the Nationals. And I think they had him in a bit more of a defensive midfield role. That's why I think I just mistakenly called him a defender. But he was effective going forward. And as we all, UBC on the set pieces were super dangerous, right? And he was one of the more dangerous guys. I think he has a brother too on the team, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, boys, as you were talking, the next pick came in. Forge made a really quick one. They snagged Mohammed Al-Shakman from McMaster University. And Steve, your reaction there says it all. What do you make of this pick?
You know what? I'm not super familiar with him, but I got a good friend, Greg Gallo, who's from Hamilton. He knows McMaster culture well, and he's a player that my buddy Greg talks about. So I don't know him super well. I think Julian, you might know him a bit better, but skillful player. And again, I think back to the theme, it's leadership, right? I think he's a player that's not really gonna be intimidated by the jump to the professional level.
I think this one again speaks to the local connection,
Yeah.
because he's at Mac and he's going to school in the Hammer. I believe he's from the Hammer or the surrounding area. Then that speaks to what Bobby's looking for, because Bobby's looking to build on guys. Like, yes, he'll bring in his internationals, but he's looking for a good team builder and character builder, somebody who can also build what they need and how they need to do it. The other thing too that you got to think about with Forge is retooling, but they're retooling quietly and slowly. And that's the mark of a champion, is that rebuild, not when you have to, rebuild as you have to. So I think that's the theme here that we're seeing from Bobby and the executives of Forge.
And Nick, though, it's another theme. It's off the board, isn't it? I don't think Shakman was in anyone's top 30 necessarily. Again, not to disregard his quality, because he's certainly a good player, but it's a little bit off the board, isn't it?
It is, and I think that's the theme of this draft is off the board picks. And speaking of off the board picks, the last pick in the draft is I'm gonna have to say it's kind of off the board. Reese Gortzon from the University of Victoria, the defender, is the final pick in the draft. So 16 picks done, gone, and a couple of our big names are still there in Bitar, Artemenko, Garcia, Marzuk, Dolo, El Gandor. All of those guys are still on the board. But Reese Gortzon, the defender from Uvic, what do you make of that one, Steve?
Yeah, you know what? I saw him briefly at Nationals as well. Uvic went down in the first round, so don't know too much, to be honest. But yeah, like as you mentioned, some of those names, I'm absolutely shocked, Nick. Like there's some big names. There's all Canadian names there that didn't get consideration in the 2 rounds. Again, this smells a little bit like filling a need pick potentially, but clearly there's something they've seen there, and I can't really comment too much on the player. Again, Ben Steiner would probably been a better. I only saw him briefly, but again, the one thing I would comment on the Vikes is that again, another solid culture. Bruce Wilson was a longtime coach there, former Canadian international, and again, we've been talking about culture, we've been talking about leadership, and off the board, those have really been the themes, haven't they? And so, but again, surprised by the pick, but that's the draft.
That's the draft, and that's exactly it, is that we've had all of these picks go off, and a few of them were way off the board, right, Jules?
Yeah, very much so. Who'd have thought that 3 out of the first 4 were from Cape Breton, which shows the quality of the program. And then in the start of the second round, the first 2 picks are from Montreal. With Pacific, that is a filling of trying to fill a hole now that Lucas McNaughton's gone to TFC. And, the good thing about Lucas coming back to Toronto is that he started at the University of Toronto. He was an All-Canadian at the University of Toronto. Went out, for a while, he went through a little bit of a hamstring issue in his last year that he played in League One. Then he got out to Pacific. Was a little disappointed he didn't start off with the 9 stripes, but then ended up at Pacific, won a championship with Pacific, and now he's moved off to the big club with Toronto. He's now in California training with them. So the good thing is that they obviously saw the need and had a plan. And they went and they found a local defender again that they don't have to do too much with in terms of the external stuff. Now they can actually just do the simple things and just worry about the field, because he doesn't have to worry about the stress of actually having to find a place, get settled. Do I really like Victoria? Because Victoria is a quiet place. It's a nice city. It's a beautiful city, but it's a quiet place. And you have to be ready to do that. And a lot of these guys are young. Like all of these guys are young. Some of them like to have their fun. You're there to be professional, but sometimes, the fun creeps in. It's the little things you don't see. So it's good to know that you've got somebody who's already local and he can play.
This is true. We're going to take another quick break here, guys, and when we come back, we'll wrap up the whole draft and talk about maybe some of the names that didn't get picked, because there's a lot of them. So we will be right back here on Garage Door Sports after this.
Hey guys, it's producer Jake here from Betting House, the Garage Door Sports Network's ultimate degenerate gambling podcast. Catch our episodes weekly on Apple, Spotify, and Google as we bring you banter, laughter, and of course picks for all sorts of games throughout the week. Give us a follow on our socials at BettingHousePod, where you can catch all our bets each week, as well as some bonus content. Remember to always gamble responsibly. Let's get rich.
He's a fairly.
Are you looking for a weekly sports podcast filled with insight and analysis you can't get anywhere else? How about a show with three friends who truly love what they talk about? If so, Garage Door Sports is the podcast for you. Hosted by Nick McVicar, Kyle Vardy, and Irfan Manji, they bring you all the latest news, notes, and of course analysis on the sporting world. Are you ready for it? Let's go.
Hey everyone, this is Irfan Manji from Touchline Thoughts, powered by the Garage Door Sports Network. We are an all-soccer podcast hosted by yours truly and Paige Culver. We provide news, analysis, and opinions each episode as well. You can listen to us on your favorite podcatcher and follow us on Twitter or Instagram. Cheers.
We are back. Nick McVicar joined by Julian Carr and Steve Ball. And guys, it's been a surprising draft, I guess is the best way to put it. Lots of players picked outside of what we anticipated. But let's go through Steve's big board and kind of see where some of the guys that were on our list ended up going. And in the first 10, 3 guys got picked. 2 actually from your top 5, Steve, ended up going to FC Edmonton, while Chris Campoli ends up at Halifax. Do you think it's a good move by Edmonton to grab 2 of the top guys in the draft available?
Yeah, I mean, clearly their philosophy was to go with excuse me, with the best, pardon me, the best players available on some level. Obviously, I think needs always in the back of your mind. Again, a bit surprised the goalkeeper didn't go, but we had a little bit of everything, didn't we? I mean, I think there were some things that you could look at and go, yeah, that's pretty predictable. And then clearly all 4 of us rather, were surprised by some of the picks. Obviously, we've got some different coaching philosophies in there. We've got some mad scientists. We've got some more, perhaps more traditional role filling going on. But I was surprised that not one Carleton player went. I'm not just saying that because I am a Carleton guy, but I just thought the way they play the game, their only disadvantage, perhaps, of some of the Carleton players is size. And I think we saw bigger players. Julian, you might speak to this a bit more as well. I think we went, clearly there was an emphasis perhaps on athleticism, on work ethic, perhaps not at the expense of skill, but I think those were clearly factors in some of the draft picks.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's move on to the next 10 in your big board there. And 2 of the players obviously were picked in Luca Richie and Soji Olatoy. Some big names still available, though, as we mentioned. And coming back to it, Julian, is there one guy that you really thought was going to be picked and was a perfect fit for somebody that didn't end up getting taken?
Yeah, like in sitting here and thinking about it, like the more I sat there and thought about it, like Rafael Garcia, I thought for sure would be going back to Valor. Like I thought out of all the Carleton guys, I thought for sure he'd be the one guy that would go. Now, it surprises me, but at the same time, it doesn't surprise me because I think there's a few things that are probably going to be at play because, as we know, COVID has messed up everybody's preseason. Because all the teams would be in preseason right now. Some of them can't practice because of provincial restrictions. Some of them are trying to figure out if they're going to end up going away to train, either in the Caribbean or down south in the US. And also the other thing too that's playing is something that I touched on, and I know I'm probably beating a dead horse again, but I think that a lot of the players that weren't chosen are going to end up playing. If there's a local side or a side that's close to them, I think they're going to end up playing locally. I think a lot of the Carleton players will end up being on either the York list, or will end up being on especially the Athletico list. I think a couple will end up in Halifax. But I also think that a lot of the Toronto players, a lot of the Nine Stripes player choices will end up being local university players, or dare I say it, like players that have been through that, have played in Ontario's League One, and will end up going someplace else. I think a lot of this, like if we look at a lot of the picks were not so much marketing picks, but they were either necessity picks or they were marketing picks. And in it being a marketing pick, I think that you have to sell, like in Edmonton's case, they've got to sell their team. They've got to sell it to a potential owner. They have to sell it to their fans and let their fans know that they still believe, that they still can believe in the program. And so they went for a splash and a bang, and they got that. I think players like Omar Marzouk will end up on a CPL roster for sure, because again, a 6'4" player with little man skill who runs the wing like a gazelle, he'll end up on a CPL roster for sure if he chooses to. There's other players like defenders. I don't think people were gonna make a splash with a defender unless the defender was local, like we saw with Forge. And like I said, Forge is building. I think they're building and they're retooling as they have to build and retool, because they're looking down the road. They're succession planning already. I think we see the same thing with Calvary. Phil DeSantos has a plan. And I think that the plan that he's putting together, we'll see the fruits of it, I think probably in the early stages of the season. Pacific has got to fill some holes. And Halifax, well, Stephen always has a plan. So, and once he gets going, then there's almost nobody in the country better.
Hey, Nick, can I play host a little bit here? Because you've been such a great host, as you always are. But what's your feeling on some of the surprises? I mean, you're a soccer guy. How do you feel the draft went overall?
Well, the one thing that I was thinking before the draft that you guys were all talking about was the goalkeepers. And as much as I think Artemenko is an outstanding talent, because he played fantastic at Guelph this past season, unless he went first overall to Ottawa,
yeah.
or even first in the second round to Ottawa, the only team that I thought might take a goalie in this draft was Ottawa. That's not saying other teams don't have a need, because there's definitely a couple teams that could use a goalie. But I didn't think that was going to happen, so I wasn't surprised that no goalie was taken. Expect Artemenko to be on a roster next year. That's my guess, because the one thing about this draft is that these players who don't get picked can still play, right? It's not like they are restricted to you have to be drafted like, say, the NFL or the NHL. You can still play, right?
Yeah,
there is a very, very clear path. And whether it is playing for the U Sports level or you are going to the CPL level, there is a chance for these guys to make the step. And I think Artemenko will be there. The other guy, I guess I'm not really surprised that he wasn't taken, but we talked about him a lot as well, is Bitar. And this is a guy who's been drafted before. So these teams know what he is. And I think that might have played into a factor a little bit as to why he wasn't taken this time. But there is a good chance that Gabby Bitar ends up on either Cavalry or Ottawa.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
So and you know what? It's funny. Obviously I'm wearing my Ravens shirt here. So, but no, I mean, I was
bias,
shocked at that.
I see.
Yeah. Whoa. But yeah, Marzouk was a shocker too, as Julian mentioned, just because, again, size, ability, he's a total package kind of player. Gabby as well. I mean, talking to Kwesi Loney in the week, and I mean, I know Kwesi's biased, but Kwesi also knows the league quite well. He said he thinks Gabby's a top 5 player. He's a perennial All-Canadian. He's the second all-time leading goal scorer in Carleton history. He's got 40 goals in 4 seasons. So, I mean, when Ben said that Cairo Coor is the most, far and away the most prolific goal scorer in U Sport, I didn't want to didn't want to disagree with him on air, but I mean, you can't go against something like that. I wouldn't say far and away the best goal scorer, but he's certainly Gabby Bitar's in that conversation as well. So yeah, perhaps there was something there. I think the only disadvantage, and Julian, you probably agree, is Gabby's not a big dude. He's got a bit of an edge to him, but he's not a physical player. Like, he's not necessarily a guy that's going to go into 30, 70 tackles and things like that. So he's a possession player. He's a run at you type of player. So, but yeah, shocked that Garcia and Bitar from Carleton, just because the way Carleton plays, and again York as well. I thought even Jaden Vilfort was in there too, a young player, an Ottawa guy as well, who I thought has that sort of physical presence. But it was an interesting draft, and we'll see how it all plays out. But I think, Nick, your point is really well taken, in that these players are not going to play, right? There's still plenty of fish in the sea, so to speak. And now it really just becomes like a free agent game, doesn't it? So, I mean, now you can sort of, Julian said a little bit off that, you can sort of take your pick of the litter now.
Yeah. I think that's one thing too, that we got to take into account. Like, this is the U Sport Draft.
Yeah.
There's still another tier, and there's some very good players in that other tier, in the Canadian college tier. A bunch of them actually play at the national championship, Humber Hawks. So you've got a bunch of players that you've chosen your 16 players, and now you'll start to see which players filter in, which players now need to be seasoned, which players will get U Sport contracts, and then go back. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if a bunch of the U23 players for Halifax and their U23 team end up being Cape Breton, SFX, and the likes, because they'll have a place for them to play over the summer. They'll be able to travel, train with the first team. Teams will get better and they'll get stronger, because realistically, Dino does a fantastic job. And the whole Atlantic region is fairly strong. And that's the thing too, is that university soccer has gotten so good now that, like, case in point, I'll give you an example. Karmasako on a regular basis has 1 or 2 Division I scouts at his practices every single day, every single practice. And they're just picking guys off his roster. And that's why he's 45 deep, because he knows at any point he could lose players. They could turn around and sign, and that would be the end of it. There's another player that I was surprised wasn't in the draft, and I'm not sure why, and I haven't spoken to him in a while, and that's Demersa Yuma from York. I expected, like, especially being the player of the year, I thought for sure he would have been in the draft. But I don't know. Again, it speaks to maybe he's not interested. He has played professionally overseas. Maybe he's already got something set up. Who knows? But
yeah, I mean, sorry, Jules, I felt the same about Matteo Di Brienne as well, right? We're
yes.
like, whoa, I didn't see his name in there. And but again, obviously, you never know what's going on, sort of under the covers, if you will. So
yeah, like a lot of teams signed players or have agreements to sign players and said, just don't even bother going in the draft. It's like, you're going to already come and train here, and we're going to probably put you on the squad if you come with the right attitude. And I get that. You know what? It's kind of the way that the CFL draft was for so long, where they pick up a player, they pick a 4th-year player, and if the player wasn't going to be either one of the first 2 practice squad players, or they weren't going to make the team, they'd send them back to the university for the 5th year. And so they could get some more seasoning and better coaching. And the truth of the matter is that I honestly and truly believe that that is the best way to do this in this country, because we're talking, we haven't had a true pro league since 1992, 1993. All right. And now we're in a league that's in its 4th year. This is going to take time to grow. Yeah. Not only grow with players, but grow with coaches, grow with administrators, and just grow with owners, because you've got people with deep pockets who are willing to put the money out. But owning a team is also an ego play. And if you're going to have that, if you're going to be that ego, if you're going to have your ego rise to that occasion, then you got to understand that you're going to have to pay for it, because in big boy sports, they only count one team that wins, and that's the team that probably is paying the most. and, Orr's assembled the best squad. And then we'll see what happens with Pacific this year, because you know what, if Pacific all of a sudden drops off and Forge is there again, well, we know who the royalty is of the league. If Pacific's there and Calvary's there and Calvary's able to get over one this year, then again, we know now who the royalty of the league is.
Yeah.
But
It's a bit of an outsider though, Joel. This league needs a commissioner that's going to take it a little bit to the next level if it's going to survive, really. Don't they? Yeah. I mean, Nick, we talked a bit about that beforehand, but there's that vacancy. The longer it goes unfilled, I think with the, people are going to be excited coming out of this pandemic. They're going to want to see. I mean, the momentum's there. I mean, Canadian soccer, the momentum is so there. It's just hanging there, right? So I mean, the opportunities. There's so many opportunities. I think it just needs that right person, and it's going to be a crucial hire whatever direction they go in.
Yeah, and the question is the big question, and I hate boiling it down to money. The question is, what are you willing to pay?
Yeah.
And what's that person willing to do? Because you need somebody who's got a sharp business mind, who's willing to take that bull by the horns. And at the same time, they're working for shares. They're not working for, they'll get paid decently, but they're not going to get paid CEO money. This is what we've seen with a lot of the leagues that have taken place over the years, that unfortunately, to be a quality league, at times you have to be top heavy. But if you're top heavy, then you've got to have a good set of lieutenants around you. And the problem is that somebody's got to come in who's got to be an excellent business person, but has also got to have 2 or 3 good lieutenants that are willing to go and get in the muck and say, no, this is the way we're going to do it. If you don't like it, that's fine, but this is the way we're still going to do it.
Yeah. And and charisma and vision would help too, don't you think? I mean, I think that's what's going to take it to the next level.
Yeah. The outgoing commissioner had that charisma. It's like, you always saw him with a smile on his face. David was always there. He was always there to answer questions, and he marshaled them through some tough times and some rough waters.
Yeah.
But I understand his desire to be an owner. I understand his desire to do that. Now the question is, who's the successor? And realistically, to be quite honest with you, and I'm throwing a name out there, I haven't spoken to him. He just got back on vacation. I think he's on another vacation again, this time winter vacation.
Of course.
But unfortunately, he's the president of Canada Soccer, and that's Nick Bontis. You've got the guy who basically is one of the top 2 or 3 people in DeGroote Business School in Mac, and he understands business. He lectures all over the world about business. He's a soccer guy. He's a Western alum. He was an OUA. He was an OUA All-Star. Back then it was the OCAA, or no, back then it was. I think it was the OUA. So I don't know. I can't remember. But he's a former All-Star. Represented Western well. He might have actually been an All-Canadian, and he believes in the game, and his heart's in the game.
What about Jules? What about a guy like a Julian de Guzman? Is that a reach? Does he? I'm not sure.
I don't know that Julian wants that headache.
Yeah.
Not speaking out of turn, but I don't know that. I think Julian wants to own a team. Julian wants to affect change that way.
Yeah.
The other person who, to be quite honest with you, who I think would make a good choice is somebody that we both know very well, and that's Earl Cochran.
He popped into my mind as well, but yeah.
Earl has the business acumen. He has the contacts with FIFA. He has the contacts in Canada Soccer.
TFC, obviously, former TFC.
TFC. He's well known and well liked by a lot of the people in the MLS.
Players, coaches, and even referees.
Exactly, and he can be leaned on. He can lean on people for all sorts of advice. And on top of that, he knows what it takes to run an organization from the ground up.
I'm gonna message him right now, Jules.
Getting some underground work done here, folks. That's what's happening on Garage Door Sports all the time.
But that's what needs to happen next. The next commissioner has to come in, and he has to do a sell job in Edmonton, because they need an owner.
Yep.
And it hurts me it personally hurts me that Edmonton doesn't have an owner right now, that Edmonton is in a caretakership. And that's like Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver have always been the cities that I've always seen as the hotbeds for soccer. And the people of Edmonton are so passionate about, like I said before earlier, they're so passionate about their team. They're so passionate about the game. And if you need to see any further, all you have to do is look at that Canadian game between Mexico and Canada, where they packed the stadium. They sold 52,000 tickets. And the only reason it wasn't completely full was because people physically couldn't get there because of the snow.
It was epic.
They couldn't land in the city.
Yeah. No, it was that was an epic moment in Canadian soccer, wasn't it? I mean, that was sort of a generational moment. Yeah.
Let's put it this way. I was actually on vacation in Arizona when that match happened. And I made my friend, we were at a sports bar and we got lucky that the game was on and they put it on. And I'm like, we're not leaving until this game's over. Like they wanted to go. I'm like, we're not going anywhere. I'm watching the end of this game.
That's awesome. They must have been, well, and to be in Arizona, like watching that game as well. Like what was it? Yeah. What was the temperature? It was minus like, well, let's not even say what it was, but.
The best though was the snow diving.
I was just going to say that. That was honestly, I don't think, I was trying to think like in terms of Canadian soccer celebrations there, I mean, that was maybe, you could argue that maybe is the best one ever.
Yeah.
No, it is.
Yeah.
It 100% is. The only one that can compete with that is D-Ro doing his flip all the time. But
great call.
Yeah. That was more of a him thing. That wasn't, he did that everywhere. This is Canada soccer. Like, how many other players on any other team are going to think of doing that? Like, that is Canadian soccer at its best.
Yeah, like
and it's been immortalized.
If he had Eric Cantona, like, karate kick the snowbank, it could have been
that would have hurt.
I tweeted.
Yeah, it would have hurt. Yeah.
I tweeted it out, and a bunch of my buddies in the U.S. saw the tweet. And they were like, and then I sent it out on WhatsApp and they saw the tweet and they started laughing. They go, only in Canada.
Yeah.
Would you guys jump in a snowbank when you score?
But Nick,
and I go,
Nick,
what else?
Nick, you would say, right? I mean, that got international attention, didn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
Canadian soccer rarely gets international attention, but the goal in that game was spectacular as well as David's goal. And it was just a special moment for Canadian soccer.
Yeah, and I mean, you're watching the growth of the game in Canada, and I spoke to you guys off air about this before, and like I played in the system. You guys have played in the system. We know what it is, and now to see guys at my age that I played against having the success on the international level, not just in Canada, not just at the U Sports level, not even going down to NC2A and having success, because many Canadians have gone and done that. But there was never the next pathway, right? Now we have that next pathway. Guys are having success on the domestic level across the world and at the international level with the national team. And this growth of this game has been so important for the growth of the CPL, which is why we're all here today anyway. Because of that, the CPL has a chance to really succeed. But as you mentioned, Jules, they need to have that commissioner in place in the next little bit who can take what David did and take it the next step further and make sure that we have more of the foundation growth, because we already have a few squads that have been announced, but we're still waiting on confirmation in Saskatoon, out in BC, and now, as we mentioned, David taking over Windsor. There's so much more growth that could happen, but we have to see where it's going to go, and that's the biggest thing for the CPL is you have to temper the expectations with how much success the national program is having until we know the next step for the league itself. And that's what this season is going to be so important for the growth of the league down the line. And to have more than just Forge repeating all the time and Cavalry in the final, and the fact that Pacific won this year was so big. Are we going to have York take that next step, who were in the playoff this year and had a very successful season with a lot of under 21 Canadians, under 23 Canadians. They had the most minutes by any team of young Canadians on their roster. If they can keep doing that, if they can keep progressing these young guys forward like Max Ferrari and Elijah Haley and Wright, those kids have the potential to be the next run of players who take their talents elsewhere. And I think that is what is important for the league this season. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jules, but that's kind of where I see 2022 for the CPL.
I completely agree. I think that the next generation has to be afforded the opportunity to step up. And the only way that now you sit and you think about it. We have roughly about 40 players playing internationally in various leagues. There's I think 2 that are playing in some of the top leagues in the world. And that's it. Like, there's a bunch in Turkey, 1 in Belgium, actually 2 in Belgium, 1 in France, 1 in England. The rest of them are mostly in the MLS, South America, couple in South America.
Couple in Holland, I think. Couple in Holland, I believe. Right?
Couple in Holland as well. Yeah. 3 or 4 in Portugal.
Yeah.
But as it grows, then, and that's what this league is. This league has to be a point where now the kids that are playing at 12, 13, 14, 15 now see someplace where they can go. When Stevie and I were playing in university, it's like the CPL was on life support. And because it was on, the CSL was on life support, and they could never get their act together. And so by the time we both graduated, there was nothing left. Like, there was 3 incarnations of the Ottawa Pioneers, the Ottawa Intrepid, and I don't even know what the 3rd version of it was. Halifax lasted a year. The most successful has been Vancouver because they survived. Toronto Blizzard came and went. North York Rockets came and went. Winnipeg Fury came and went. Edmonton Brickman came and went. And that was only because there was no league, because the Brick was going to keep throwing money at it. And I can't even, Calgary Kickers came and went. And we played with guys who played on those teams. But it was something to aim for. The only problem is that by the time you got there and you got seasoned, there was nothing left. Now there's something that's here, something that has to work. And the success of the Canadian team and the success of this league go hand in hand, because if there's both of that, and if both are successful, then you have that feeder. You have those players, especially in the hotbed that I live in Brampton, where you have a player, at least one player, on every single national team in this country. And that's not meaning that Brampton's like it. That just happens to be the hotbed for the moment. You know, you have the Mississaugas, you have the Montreals, you know, and not only in Montreal's, you've got hot spots all over Montreal. Montreal has more stadia and more fields than I've ever seen in a metropolitan area anywhere in this country. And we're not talking multi-purpose fields. We're talking soccer specific fields.
Yeah.
Quebec has always been a hotbed. For a bit, they lost their way, but now you have the Montreal program, you have Trois-Rivières, you have Sherbrooke is starting to get their legs again, and that was a storied program in itself.
And we don't even mention McGill and Concordia. They used to be sort of the big schools back in the day, right?
Yep. And Concordia is trying to find their way again. So you have a college program that feeds into a university program there. And it's just like, if you look at the RESQ website, everything is tiered, and they've figured it out in Quebec. BC is now going to have a high performance league with League One BC.
Yep.
On both the men's and the women's side. So you have it developing, and you have it as a feeder. So the players that aren't chosen today in the draft are the same players, are some of those same players that will be playing in these these Canadian sides that will go on and eventually represent this country because of the seasoning and the coaching they get. But we only get better if this league survives. And that's the reason why it's so important that Edmonton survives. It's so important that Vancouver team that's supposed to start in 2023 gets off the ground. It's so important that we figure out what's going on in Saskatchewan and they build a soccer specific stadia so that they can actually play out of. It's imperative that they get a team in Quebec City, that they get a team in Montreal.
And can I jump in? And I know Nick would love a team in Mississauga.
That
Sorry,
too.
what was that? I missed that.
I said, and I know Nick would love a team in Mississauga. We
I would
talked
love
about
it.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
No,
and to
but
be honest, I think I could support it. I'm smiling, but I'm actually being serious. Yeah.
Yeah.
You need at least 2 teams as far as I'm concerned. You need 2 teams in Montreal.
Yep.
You need you need 1 in Quebec City. You've got Hamilton, you've got Mississauga, you've got York.
Well,
Okay.
Windsor now, obviously. But Jules,
Windsor?
we were saying, do you think 12? Like I mean, you, Nick, and I were chatting a bit in preparation for the show, and we're saying, like, what do you think? Let's say in the next 5 years, let's just go with a mini vision. The next 5 years, can the league get to 12 and support 12? You think?
Well, I
think
mean,
the league can
I'm
get
going to
to
jump in
14.
here, Jules.
Yeah,
I'm
go
going to jump
ahead.
in. I'm sorry, but they already have 3 that they've sort of given ownership to, right? The Saskatchewan team, whether ends up in Saskatoon, where like they say, or somewhere else. The BC team in the Lower Mainland and Windsor. So they already have 3 more scheduled. That would put them at 11.
Yeah.
So in the next 5 years, I think that they can easily find at least 1 more ownership team, possibly a couple more as well. And you mentioned it, Jules. Montreal has to find a team, I think, or at the very least, Quebec City needs to get a team just so that there is 1 team in the province. Because right now, that's the biggest.
That's a hole.
Missing
That's
hole.
a massive hole.
It's a missing
map.
hole. And I understand that CF Montreal might not want a team in their backyard, and that's why they might not have been in Montreal just yet. So that's why Quebec City could be the more realistic first option just for now. But if this league wants to be taken seriously, if this league is going to become the big league that it is, and when we're talking about putting 16 to 20 teams in, Montreal has to be one of those teams. There's no doubt about it. Absolutely. But the first realistic one, Quebec City might be the first one in that province.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Steve.
Jules. Yeah, Jules. I just because I'm a little bit ignorant of this. Do you think Montreal is politically blocking that? I mean, in terms of not wanting to have the CPL team in there as a rival for the Impact, is that possible, or just because it just seems weird to me to not have, like, Montreal's such. I mean, internationally, Montreal's a known city, right? And it's weird to have a league where you got your pretty much your second biggest city in the country and doesn't have a team.
Technically, the first biggest city doesn't have a country either. Or it doesn't have a team either, sorry.
Oh, yeah, actually, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess York. Yeah, you're right. So, yeah.
I think, and I'm speaking out of turn here, but I think it's a couple of things. I think one, I think that now that the MLS has got an under 23, has got a reserve division, I think that ship has sailed, where you get Toronto FC 2, you get Toronto FC 2, Montreal, CF Montreal 2, CF Montreal 2, and Vancouver in the league. I really think that because of where TFC 2 was playing, where they weren't even playing, they were basically playing in the PDL or in championship or in the in Div 1 or Div 2, something like that. So it would have made more sense to have the players have a TFC 2 team playing in the CPL, because on top of that, you're going to get a draw. And I think that's part of it. I think that there's and I would get shot by people who I know, but there's too much fiefdom building. And it's like, those 3 teams are basically, whether you want to say it or not, are American teams, because even though it's Canadian ownership, they're American teams. They play in an American league, and they had to get special provision from FIFA to do that. The second thing is that Montreal, as cosmopolitan as Montreal is, and as much as Montreal loves their sports, they are very regional. And the university, and because of the way they've got the structure set up, where you slot a CPL team in that structure, because you think about it for a second. If you've got your youth leagues, then you go Cégep, then you go university, then you go, if anything, you go to CF Montreal. So where do you put the CPL in there? Okay, does the CPL end up being between university and CF Montreal? That's the next thing. The other side of it is that ownership in Quebec, because you got to have deep pockets in Quebec for the ownership because the taxation is just murderous. And so when you put a team in Quebec City, they have the facilities, they can do it. It's not going to be a soccer specific stadium at what used to be the Pepsi Center at Laval. It's not going to be a soccer specific stadium, but it's still going to be a stadium, and a stadium with all the amenities. They need something that's going to bridge that gap. And I heard Gareth Wheeler talking about this and joking about how Halifax needs to fire their travel planner. Well, the truth of the matter is Halifax is on an island by itself. The part of the reason why Halifax was so successful in the island games was because they didn't really have to go anywhere. They were already close to home. And that has always been the problem that's plagued a national league in this country, is the distance, the sheer distance. Now that you're going to have a team in Vancouver, Victoria and Vancouver are close. Calgary and Edmonton are still relatively close to that. Saskatoon all of a sudden becomes the jump off point because now it's a stopover. Literally.
That's true. Yeah.
True. But the good thing about Saskatoon is that Saskatoon is only 6 hours away from Winnipeg. So they're still close that way. Ontario will end up having Windsor, London, and I'm throwing names out there and people will think that I'm crazy, but mark my words. Unless they found some way to piss off the executive in the league, you'll end up with Windsor, London, Mississauga, York, and Simcoe.
And Hamilton.
And Ottawa as well in Ontario. And then you'll have hopefully a team in Montreal, a team in Quebec City, and then Halifax. Because really, other than Halifax, there's no place else that can support a team in the Maritimes.
The only one I could think of would be St. John's.
St. John, good call.
That would be the only other one.
Yeah, I agree. But the question, stadia. Can they play?
Well, that's the question for a lot of these places, right? That's the same question for Mississauga. We don't have a stadium here in Mississauga. I'm from Mississauga. I grew up here. We've never had a stadium here in Mississauga for soccer. Which
really shocks me that nobody has built a stadium in Mississauga. You think about it.
For what though? The problem is for what before? What would they have built a stadium for soccer in Mississauga? What would have been the use of it?
Not even for soccer. There's not even a multi-purpose stadium in Mississauga.
What would have been the use of it? We don't have any. We don't have any teams that play in a high enough level other than the OHL team and now the Raptors 905, who aren't even technically our own.
Yeah,
we've never had a team that plays anything.
Well, you think about it. The only thing is junior football, and even junior football isn't the draw here.
No,
it's a draw in Ottawa. It's a draw. It's a draw in Ottawa. It's a draw out west. It's a draw in Quebec. Yeah. It's not a draw here. Like the problem with the market of Toronto and the GTA is that you have to win quickly. You have to maintain it, and you have to be. Yeah, you have to be on top of it, because if you're not on top of it, it goes quickly, and it goes by the wayside quickly, and then you're yesterday's news.
But you know what? I did, and again, Nick, you're gonna let you go on the Mississauga. We talked a little bit about Mississauga. Just for me, it's just ripe, isn't it? I just really think you're right for not just for some sort of multi-purpose, but I'm absolutely considering the population. There is a grassroots soccer culture there. You grew up there. I grew up in Burlington and Mississauga, Chinguacousy. I remember all these clubs that back in the 80s were you know what I mean, we're establishing youth soccer really in Ontario.
And it's a huge thing. And the team in Mississauga wouldn't just be a Mississauga team though. This would be a Western GTA side where you will pull fans from Brampton, Milton, Oakville, maybe even the eastern side of Burlington as well. Maybe people who don't want to cheer for Forge in Hamilton, which I know that there isn't anyone in Hamilton who wouldn't cheer for Forge if they're a soccer fan, because that fan base is incredible. Love going to see games down there. As a semi-neutral, it's so much fun.
But you know what, Nick, you're right. I grew up in Burlington, and there's a rivalry between Burlington and Hamilton. I would argue that Burlington people would probably lean more towards Mississauga.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. And then you also pull people from Etobicoke, right? The people who don't necessarily want to drive all the way to York or drive to Toronto. I know it's not that far of a drive, but if you put it in the right spot, if you put this stadium in the right spot, you will be able to pull from one of the largest populated areas in Ontario, let alone in the country,
Mhm.
easily. And it baffles me that it just doesn't happen, but that's kind of where we're at, unfortunately. And I think if we keep going this way, eventually it will show that, okay, yeah, this has enough. They have enough fans in the Mississauga area, and the soccer community here is incredible. Like growing up, we had 8 teams or 8 clubs in Mississauga alone. Right, and that was only clubs that played in the South Region Soccer League, let alone all the ones that play in other leagues in and around, right? So the number of players, the sheer number of players we had here growing up was incredible. And then you add in the fact that all of their parents and all of their relatives who might not be age of playing soccer at that point would be fans. Like, it baffles me that there isn't a team here, and it baffles me that no one's really talked about it. There is a push to have one. Saga City Collective have done a great job over the first couple seasons of the CPL trying to get a team, but the city is holding it up, and that's the problem right now.
And such an ethnically diverse place as well, Nick. We were talking about that last week, weren't we? About how, I mean, you can not only just draw from different communities as well, right?
Absolutely.
I think we've seen that in other places as well that share that same quality.
Absolutely. Let's round up here, boys. Get back quickly. I just want to show you the draft board as it was sent out by the league. There's your 16 players. We've already talked about kind of the craziness that went on. I want to ask you, Julian, because you're more of the GTA guy. Do you think York can take that next step this year with the new coach, with some young players coming in Rossi and Olatoy, who are offensive players? Do you think they can take that next step and push maybe into the final next year?
I don't know about the final, but I think they can make some noise. I think getting to a final at this level there's a combination of things, especially with the way that things are these days. With there we say it, with the whole COVID culture. I think what has to happen is they have to get off to a quick start so that they build a cushion. Then they have to hope that they don't get hit by the injury bug or the COVID bug. Then they have to hope that they've got enough of a culture built and enough of a padded league built that when they hit that rough spot, they don't end up falling too far behind and then having to end up in that 4th spot for the playoffs and having to play either Forge or Pacific or whoever's in first place and is having a lights out year. Because in this league, somebody's going to have a lights out year. If those things fall into place, and that's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, but those things that if they fall into place, then then I could see the Nine Stripes making their run. But again, like I said, there's a lot of things that have to fall into place, and they have to be, and sometimes to be a champion, you not only have to be good, you have to be a little bit lucky.
That's true.
Because I think the infamous story, Wayne Gretzky talks about where he scored 39 games in a row or whatever the
50
record
goals
was.
in 39 games.
Yeah. And he said, like, right after he scored, like in the 40th game, he was sick. He was carrying injuries. He played with the flu and everything else. And that's the reason why he didn't score the next game, because he actually was out. He had to sit out because he couldn't go, and that's the thing. It's like, you look at some teams across the board in all sports, the teams that you think should win normally do win, but also the teams that don't win that should have won, something happened, something derailed them. They had a bad game at the wrong point, and we see it all the time, and we see it all the time in Champions League. We see it all the time in other sports. We've seen it in the MLS. We saw it last year. New England had a bad game at the wrong time. They were far and away the best team in the league last year.
Absolutely.
And they had a bad game at the wrong time.
Absolutely.
Steve,
sorry. Go ahead, Jules.
No, I was just going to say, so anything, like, I do believe that they have the right mix, or they will have the right mix, and they have the right mix of coaching as well as they'll have the right mix of players because they've been there, done that. But again, who knows? They could be flying high, then all of a sudden COVID hits their entire team And now they've got to pull players and sign players from they've got to sign a bunch of League One players or a bunch of like senior players because they need to play a game and they can't postpone games for that long.
Yep. It's true. And I mean, that's so up in the air. You're right. Steve, do you want to add in or talk about any team specifically, or do you want to just talk about the draft in general?
Yeah, I'll comment mostly on the draft. You guys know the league a bit better than I do. I'm really curious about the league, I must admit. And you're right. Julian brings up a good point. I mean, COVID's a factor now. We see it in international sports, right? You've got teams in the Premiership in England canceling games because they've got pools of 60 players in hugely deep pockets. So it's going to have an impact, I think, on this league as well. If Julian's right. No, I'm really pleased with the draft. I'm really happy for some of the players that perhaps didn't expect their names to get called. They got called. I think that's really, for me as a university player myself, and like Julian said, never really having had the opportunity to go to another level, it must be very exciting for them and their families to be on a draft board and being discussed by characters like us on programs like this. So I think that for me, that's really cool. And I'm really surprised by the first pick, but really happy for D'Acunha in Ottawa as well. And I was going to float a conspiracy theory that maybe that might lure Dino Morley to possibly coach in Ottawa. I don't know. That just popped into my head about half an hour ago because we were talking a little bit off air about the article that Julian put together about Canadian university coaches, Kwesi Loney as well. And are we going to see a university coach or another university coach make that transition into the professional ranks? So there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, going forward. It's, like you said, we talked about commissioner, we talked about Edmonton, we talked about Ottawa's uncertainty. I was just on the Ravens chat group now, looking down, and some of the boys are a bit disappointed with how Ottawa's handling things on some level. But again, there are some uncertainties, but there's so much potential, isn't it? We talked about that throughout the show. So, but on a side note, Nick, really cool opportunity to be on your show as well. This is first time for me, and to be with my good friend Julian too. So I want to give you a big shout out and a big thanks too, because this was not only really fun, really educational, but really important, I think, in the culture of Canadian soccer going forward. So more shows like this need to be covering things like this, and you do such a great job of covering a wide variety, a diversity of sports and athletes, and you really do a service. And I just really want to thank you for the opportunity to come on your show.
Thank you a lot, Steve. That means a lot. And I mean, this league is something that growing up, I only dreamed of, right? Like we didn't have this league. We didn't really have any version of this league when I was growing up. The CSL was kind of there, but it wasn't. It
was
wasn't
dying,
this.
wasn't it? Yeah.
It wasn't this. And playing, there was one path. You went to university and then you were done. Like that was all we had. Mm-hmm. And to see the success of the league over the first few seasons has been fantastic. And the only way to grow it more is to watch it, is to go to the games, is to support every step of the way and do things like this show. So I appreciate you seeing that this is something that needs to be done. And it was a lot of fun having you on. You were very insightful on the university players, where I probably struggled a little bit more. I knew the CPL teams a little bit better, but to have people like you trying to promote the game as well is such an important thing. And to have people like Julian and yourself, who know these players, who have been talking to them, who have been helping them grow their games as well. It's just so important. And the further that this league is going to go, it is imperative that it's because of people like you guys, like myself, who are just going to support it at every stretch of the game. So.
Yeah, we didn't even. I mean, it's amazing because it's such an interesting culture. We didn't even mention women's soccer, which is so huge here as well, right? I mean, I know we're doing the CPL draft, but yeah, I mean, the culture is we're in such a sea change right now, aren't we? You can feel it, and now it's exciting to be a part of. Like I was away from the game, as I mentioned to you before we did the show, and coming back to it in the last few years after almost sort of being a decade away from it. It's been really, really, and it's a social media age now. We didn't really mention that, but the game is promoted through that media now, which is special, isn't it? Because I think of Matteo De Brienne, the Carleton guy who scored a ridiculous Van Persie-esque goal in the season, and it got international recognition. It was on YouTube, right? And now those sort of things can make a difference in this league as well, right? In terms of promotion, there's a lot of self promotion, but there's also there's a wider audience now, right? So that just makes it really even more exciting.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that there needs to be a wide variety, right? Like we can't just have the self promotion, like you mentioned, because the self promotion is only going to get us so far, and we can tout the league all we want. We need other eyes on it too. So the fact that we have to grow the game outside of just the true soccer community that we grew up with is another thing, right, Julian?
Yep, very much so. And I think that if this game is going to grow that we love so much, it has to be, it can't be just, it can't operate in a vacuum. These leagues can't operate in a vacuum. They have to work in conjunction with each other. And now the relationships between the U Sport coaches and both on the men's and women's side and the clubs, as well as the players, know now that they don't have to go down south. They can stay here. They know that they can go, they know that there's another avenue. And they know that even if they decide that they want to go with the college route and then go to the university route, they know they can do that.
Yep.
As long as the seeds are there and we nurture them and we grow them, then we'll be fine. The game will get better. It took 25 years for the MLS to get where it is. Okay. And they're in year 26 now. They're in they're on their way to 50 and on their way to the third decade. But it took them that long to do it and do it properly. And there was at one point, like as the story goes, there was one point where they were literally, they were trying to decide whether they were going to throw the keys on the table and walk away. And if it wasn't for people like Lamar Hunt, and I'll use it and I'll mirror it back to the Canadian League. If there aren't the owners that we have, and you know what, and you can sit here and you can sort of vilify the Edmonton owner, but when you're a business owner, you don't want to give up your team. You don't want to give up your business if it's failing. You will fight tooth and nail. You will lose everything you have. You will go put yourself in generational debt to make sure your business survives. So when you, as an owner, turn around and put your keys on the table and walk away, a piece of you dies with you. So anytime that somebody vilifies an owner for walking away or a former owner for walking away, there's more to it than that. And if you've been a business owner, you completely understand that. So it takes a lot to do that. So, this is the reason why the league is floating them right now, because we are stronger with them than without them. We need Edmonton, and we need these other cities that are eventually going to fall into the fold by 2025. The whole point was, and the rumor as it went, was that there had to be a $25 million pocket for each of these teams to survive, because they had a budget that they were going to go through. They were going to burn through $5 million a year. We're going into year 4. And if anybody ever looked at this league and what they've had to survive in the first 4 years, in the first 3.5 years, then I got news for you. It means that life is going to be that much better on the other side, because these owners have put up with a lot. These players have put up with a lot.
Yep.
Like, who knew that we were going to get a global pandemic in year 2? So they've survived that. They've survived everything else. And you know what? And that gives me hope. That makes me smile, because you have people who are giving to the game, player-wise, owner-wise, coach-wise, administrator-wise. And this league will survive. We got to year 4. It'll survive because there's enough people who care.
Yep. And I think that is probably the best way we could possibly end this broadcast.
Wait a minute, Nick. We're not going all night?
No, we're not going all night. I think we need to end it there, or else we're gonna lose track. Steve, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm sorry Ravens didn't get taken, but it's been great to have you on. Julian, you as well. Absolute pleasure to have you on. We will have you guys back, I'm sure, sometime before the CPL season and the U Sports season to talk a little bit more. But for everyone here at Garage Door Sports and for Steve and Julian themselves, I want to thank you for watching us. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will see you guys next time around.